Hey, Todd from Lowbrow Customs here. You might wonder what's in these boxes. If you go to the website, you may notice that we just started stocking some Samwel Supplies reproduction Harley-Davidson springers. And we're getting them from our good friends at W&W in Germany. And they were kind enough to help me out with some parts to do this video for you guys. Well, since I don't have a knucklehead or a panhead, we're gonna put this springer on a Triumph. So I have a Triumph frame over here on the floor. We have one of our Lowbrow Customs hardtails bolted to it because that's what's gonna happen in the end. And I'm gonna show you some of the things that you're gonna need to do in order to get a Harley Springer on your Triumph 650 pre-70 frame. One of the cool things about this is most of the jobs I'm gonna show you are also going to apply to a Harley-Davidson. Maybe in the future, if we get our hands on a shovel, a nook, or a pan, or some bike like that, we'll go ahead and show you the same stuff, but with a Harley-Davidson frame. This is a reproduction Springer. It does take a drum brake star hub wheel, but guess what? We got something else to show you in this box. We'll get to that in a little while here, but let's go ahead and move on over here to the frame and talk about some of the things we need to do in preparation for putting the Springer onto the frame. Okay, here's the frame we're gonna use. It is a 1966 Triumph 650 frame. When you take your original front end off, you're gonna find these ball bearing races. These are for loose ball bearings. That's the original setup. We're going to need to remove those from the frame in order to install the Lowbrow Customs neck bearing conversion kit for Triumphs, in order to install a Harley-Davidson front fork with a 1-inch stem, which the Springer front end is in fact a 1-inch stem. And we have a handy dandy kit. We'll show you that here in a sec, but I wanted you to see that these races are in here because I've actually had some customers call and say, hey, I bought this kit and I'm not real sure how to install them because there's something in the way. Well, we're gonna remove those here. Super simple operation. Hammer, long punch. You just get down in there and there's a lip on it. Go from side to side. And there she goes, look at her. Piece of cake. That one's kind of greasy, so we'll take the top one out and give you a better look at it and what it looks like without the race in there. Same program as the other. It's always best when you're removing one of these to work side to side. That way it comes out evenly. There she comes, see her coming? I could have banged it a little harder, but I'm just being overly dramatic. But at any rate, there's the factory ball bearing race. And that's what it will look like once you have the race removed. Okay, we're not gonna install the new races for the tapered Timken 1-inch ID bearings just yet because there's another step we have to do before we're ready to go ahead and fit the front fork. You may notice these two large bosses on the neck of the frame. Not quite sure what the heck those are for. They really don't do serve any purpose other than the fact that they are going to be in the way for the Springer. It will not turn left to right with those in the way. And there's also, since this is an early frame, the fork lock is on the side over here. We'll go ahead and remove that as well. I haven't really ever put a Springer on this frame with this style fork lock, so I don't know if it's gonna be in the way, so I'm just gonna chop it off. And basically, we're gonna use a Sawzall. And I've done this multiple times in the past. And basically what I do is I cut it at an angle here and here, and then I move to a grinder with an abrasive disc on it and just basically sand it down. Now what you're gonna find when you're doing this job, cutting these two pieces off and sanding it down, is if you stick your finger inside the neck and put it right where this piece is, you're gonna feel it's kind of a little recess there. So what's gonna happen, and you'll see, is once these are cut off and ground down, it's going to blow a hole right in the front of the frame. So then what you do after that is you go ahead and weld up the hole and then get your sanding disc and smooth it out again so that when the frame gets powder coated, it all blends together nicely. Now, it's also worth mentioning on a later year frame, Triumph frame, they moved the fork lock to the top, and that would also need to be cut off. I have an extra frame over here, we'll show you that one. Now, if you were going to put a Springer on this year frame, you would need to cut this piece off and make it look like that frame. All right, I got the Sawzall going. Let's get to chopping. I've done this before like this. If you have a cutoff wheel and you prefer that method, that's fine by me. I don't really care what method you use. Let's just see how this is gonna go here. But let's just chop one of these off. All right, she's chopping all right. Probably if I would have had a brand new blade, it would have went a little faster for me, but you know what, she's cutting and we'll keep going. And look at that. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and cut the other, this one and this one here and here. And we're not going to bore you with the details of cutting them off. I think it's pretty self-explanatory and obvious. I did a real nice job of cutting it close to here without getting into the material here. And that's about how you want to do it. It's not like set in stone. Like I said, it is going to blow a hole in there and we are going to be re-welding. So it's not the end of the world. But that was actually a really good cut that I made with this not so great blade. All right, we have all 4 locations that we wanted to cut of the horizontal tubes on the front of the frame neck cut off. The bottom one turned out real nice. Top one could have been a little closer angle-wise this way. It's not a big deal. We'll be able to grind it off. That's not a problem. And we've also cut the fork lock off. That one blew a giant hole in the frame that we're going to have to weld shut. All right, I really like these laminated sanding discs. They're available just about anywhere. They seem to last the longest, and they seem to take the material off really well in a fast fashion. This is just an inexpensive Craftsman angle grinder I've had for quite some time that comes in handy for jobs like this. Okay, now that we're done chopping, let's get to grinding. Whoa, Nelly! All right, so you can see I've gotten the bottom one pretty much down to the hole. Just like I said was gonna happen. By the time you get it ground down, once again, if you stick your finger in there, you'll feel that little recess because of the way this is made. And so not a big deal, don't worry about it. It's gonna get welded shut and smooth back down. I kind of bumped this bottom a little bit more than I would have liked to, but we'll go ahead and we'll get that smoothed out as well. Let's go ahead and continue to, we'll blow a hole in the top and get this other thing off of there, and then we'll be ready to weld it shut, and then we'll do some more grinding and sanding and smoothing to make it nice in preparation for when it's sandblasted and powder coated. It'll all look fine, no problem. All right, so I had my buddy Tim over at Ferrucci Fabrications weld up the neck. He did a real fine job. It's nice and smooth and great looking now. Once it's powder coated, that'll blend right in. We didn't need to remove the original fork stops. I'm gonna leave those on there. Like, I'm never gonna put a different front end on here, but you know, whatever. So those are still on there. And let's go ahead and get this awesomeness from W&W Cycles unboxed, and we'll give you a look at her. All right, so we got this awesome Springer unboxed, W&W Cycles. We get these from W&W. They're available on the website now. They are made by a company called Samwel Supplies. They are coming out of the Netherlands. It's a very good, high-quality Springer. I want to point out a few key points about this style Springer. This is not meant for a 3/4 axle wheel. It does have an offset rocker on this side, and the reason for that is because it's designed to use a stock Harley drum brake. So if you have a bike with an old Springer, or you'd like to put a Springer on your bike and run a drum brake, this could be a good Springer for you. It's also available in different lengths. We have stock length, which is 19 inches. And then we have -2, +2, and +4. It does not come with a rear top clamp. We have some different options for that available on the website. You may notice it does have a stay for your brake. If you want to put one of these on Harley, this would be a really good Springer to use. Also, we have some special axles because you can see that the holes in the rockers are 2 different sizes. Once again, not meant for a 3/4 axle. Here's one of the axles that we offer for this front fork. We offer them in 3 different finishes. We have CAD, Parkerizer, Chrome. So if you're making a custom bike and you want it to be shiny and chrome, we have that available. One of the interesting things to note about a Springer axle for this style Springer is it has a couple of steps on it and gets smaller as it goes towards the end, and that hence the reason why the hole in the rocker is smaller on one side than the other. So you will be using a stock style Harley roller bearing star hub. This is not going to be a good project if you want to use a 3/4 wheel. Now the other really cool thing about this is I said you can use a drum brake. Well, guess what? You can also use a disc brake, and that's what we're gonna do. We have this really awesome disc brake kit here, also from, this is Cannonball product from W&W Cycles. If you have an old panhead and you have a drum brake and you wanna convert it to a disc brake, this kit's for you. It will literally bolt right up to your existing Springer with the use of some additional parts that we have here available at Lowbrow. If you're not aware, there's several different ways to get a set of handlebars onto a Springer, regardless of whether it's this Springer or the other aftermarket Springers available out there. As long as it's an inline Springer, there are different kinds of Springers. We're not going to get into inline and offset, but this is an inline Springer. Let's go ahead and show you some of the different top clamps we have available. Okay, for our job, we're going to use the Lowbrow Custom Springer Riser Adapter Top Clamp. And the really cool thing about this is you don't have to use standard Springer bars that are normally have knurling on 4 3/4 for the bars because of this distance here. This was designed to be used with standard style risers, and we'll put your risers on 3.5 on center, and that will give you a million more options for choices on bars, as well as one of the other reasons this clamp was designed by Lowbrow Customs was if you'd like to run a T-bar on your Springer. Oh, would you look at that? It lines up perfectly, no problem. If you'd like to run some rabbit ears on your Springer, 3.5 on center, because you're not getting 3.5 on center on those 2 holes right there. It's just not going to happen. And the other cool thing about this top clamp, it comes with some additional hardware. It's got half 14, it's got half 20, and it comes with some bolts for the pinch bolts. So basically this will just slide onto the rear of the Springer. One other thing I'd like to tell you about this is I've tried this top clamp on several of the different brands of Springers that we have here, and on some of them it slides right over like butter, and on other ones it didn't want to fit nicely, like the chrome one that we have from another company. It didn't really want to fit well, and when I tried it on this particular Springer, it also didn't want to fit well. Well, a few minutes with a drum sander on my Dremel tool, and I've opened up these 2 holes right here and to make it a nice sliding fit, because that's how you want it to fit on the fork. So if you order one of these and it's not fitting, it's easily modified to fit without a lot of work. This Springer does not come with a rear top clamp. We have this stock style top clamp available from the same company that builds the Springer, Samwel Supplies. And we also have some of these available on our website. If you're real handy and you can bend your own handlebars, you can use this top clamp that has some spuds where you can put an inch piece of tubing in there and weld it on to make your own bend, whatever you want to do. We have those available on the site. I've chosen this set of risers that we sell to go with my top clamp because I think that's going to look pretty sweet. One other thing is if you want to use this on a Harley, you're really not going to need any fork stops. I get a lot of calls on the phone where they say, hey, I'm looking at buying a Springer for my Harley. Do I need the hidden fork stop, or do I need the fork stop with a bump on it? And no, you don't. But what you will need for a Harley is we have these cups available, and these are basically, will fit just about any big twin frame. They're not gonna work for Ironhead Sportsters. But if you have a frame that has a removable cup, a big twin Harley, panhead, knucklehead, swing arm, rigid, this is the cup that you'll use, and they don't come with any bearings or races, so we have a genuine Timken brand bearing and race available on the website. So if you order these, you'll get 1 pair under 1 part number, and then you should order 2 of this Timken bearing to go with those, and then you'll just press the races into the cup, and those will work well with your Springer. Since we are putting this Harley-Davidson Springer on a Triumph 650 pre-70 frame, we're going to need this bearing kit that's available on Lowbrow Customs website. And what this is it's 2 Harley races for Timken bearings that have a 1-inch ID because the stem on the Springer is 1 inch. And then they have a shim pressed over the Harley race so that they will fit into the neck of the Triumph frame. The Springer also doesn't come with this bearing adjuster nut. This will go, once you put everything on, this gets threaded on, and this puts the tension on the bearings for your steering. And then there's a recess on this part that this rides in like so. And then on the very top, you'll have this nut, and that will complete the installation. And you'll notice the nut has a little step or ridge on it that fits into that, as well as the bearing adjuster nut also has the same ridge that fits into the bottom. All right, let's get this party started. We're gonna get the races installed in the frame, top and bottom, in preparation for getting the front fork on there. That'll be step 1 of the program. I've got this bearing race and seal installation kit. It comes with a bunch of different sizes, but see, it's just a hunk of aluminum with a taper for different races. And I picked out the one that fits this race real nice. One of the things you're gonna notice here in a sec, sometimes when you're driving these on, because it does have that shim, it'll kind of send the race in and not the shim. And then what we can do is we can just grab one that's a little bit larger and put it over it and tap it in the rest of the way. Not a big deal. Let's go ahead and do it. Hammer time. Okay, see, that's exactly what happened there. It's all cattywampus and crooked. We're gonna fix that up right now. Okay, so you can see I had it a little cattywampus, but that's okay. We straightened it up. We're gonna go ahead and tap on the outside. Make sure it's all the way seated. Hear that? Hear that ding ding? That means it's all the way seated. Let's go ahead and make sure the center portion is where it needs to be. It is. And there she is installed. You'll see that it is a little proud of the lip. As long as it's all the way down up against the bottom, you're fine. Okay, let's do the bottom one. And just like the top one, that one got a little off right out of the gate. Once again, not a big deal. Okay, now that we have the bearing races installed in the frame in the top and the bottom, we can go ahead and get the Springer fit to the frame. There's a couple other things I want to talk about real quick. I did actually trial fit the Springer on here. And what I did was I used a bearing from a Triumph kit, and it just slides right over there like butter. In order to have, since this is not a Harley-Davidson neck, which this is designed for, in order to have everything end up in the right place for the nut and the top clamp, yada yada, I'm going to be putting a couple of washers on the bottom before the bearing, like so. And then one of the other things I discovered while trial fitting the bearing that will go onto the bottom was that the 1-inch bearing, it didn't want to go over the threads. And I was like, what in the heck? The next thing I did was I grabbed some sandpaper and I cut it into thin strips like so. And then I went like this on the threads to knock down the peaks in order to get my bearing on. And so once I got my bearing past the threads, I went, oh goodness, it doesn't want to slide over the raised portion past the threads smoothly and nicely. So basically when you get this up in there, the top bearing should slide on very easily. In other words, you don't want to pound the top bearing on, because then if you ever needed to take the front end off, it would be a kind of a pain in the butt. Now, with that being said, normally what happens on the bottom bearing is it gets driven home. So I didn't dress the bump on the bottom of the stem because I have this tool that we'll use when we put the bottom bearing on. After I sanded the threads, I spent some time going like this on the step. And once I got it sanded down, and this took more than 5 minutes. This was not just a quick sand. And then I got it to the point where, oh, would you look at that? Oh boy, ooh, nice. She slides right over the threads and the step where the bearing rides on the top when it's installed. So this just goes to show you, just because things are new and wonderful doesn't mean that you might not need to finesse something to achieve that perfect fit. Because of the fact that the bottom bearing is not just gonna slide over that little step we just showed you, I'm gonna go ahead and pack the bearing with grease. That way, I can leave it on there and still pop the front end off for whenever we're going to paint or powder coat the frame. And so we'll go ahead and show you, I have an official bearing packer. I just buy some regular old grease from the AutoZone. This says multi-vehicle. Oh, high temperature. You never know, our front end might get hot when it's going down the road. I'm just kidding. I like this grease because it's red and it's kind of like almost like some of the marine grease is red. It really doesn't matter what kind of grease you use, but it's important that you pack the bearing thoroughly. In other words, you don't just take some out of the tub and go, okay, that's all good, we're good to go. You want that grease, you'll see in a sec here when we use the bearing packer, it'll come out the other side, bloop, and it'll be perfectly greased. If you don't have a bearing packer, which I don't expect everyone to have one, the other method I like to use is I'll put a glove on, a surgical glove, and then I'll put a glob of grease on my hand and I'll go like this. And I'll push the grease into the large side and to get it all through the bearing, because we're not going to be servicing this front end for quite some time. So we want to make sure that the bearings are thoroughly greased. All right, this is called a handy packer. Oh, look at her, made in USA. You basically take the lid off. You got this little cone-shaped dealio there, and you slide this out and you put the grease in the bottom, but you simply take your bearing that you want to pack, you drop it in with the cone side facing down, you use this cone-shaped chinga, and then you apply some pressure. Sometimes I'll actually put it on the floor and step on it because that applies good pressure all at once, and it's not going to break the tool. And now you can plainly see how the grease is oozing through the bearing? We'll give it another college try. And there she is. Would you look at her? Now you can be assured that the grease is all the way through the entire bearing. That's going to be good for go ahead and install it onto the fork. By using the bearing packer, you can be assured that you've done a really good job of getting that bearing greased. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm just going to wipe this off just a little bit because I really just wanted to make sure that the grease was on the inside of the bearing. Once again, I have 2 spacers on the bottom. They're actually washers, but they are taking up space. And you'll see why once we get it on there. So now we know our bearing's going to slide over nicely, and we're going to get it to the bottom, and it won't slide on to the lower raised portion. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a handy tool I made. You too can make this tool. It's simply a piece of galvanized pipe I got at the home store. Well, look, I used it a couple of times. So basically what happens is this end of the tool will be riding on the inner portion of the bearing. Because obviously if you use something that was hitting on this outer edge, you'd probably screw up the bearing where it wouldn't spin freely. And then the other thing about the tool is the outside diameter fits the inside of the bearing, and the inside diameter of this piece of pipe fits over the stem. Whoa, what a concept. All right, so I showed you my awesome piece of galvanized pipe. The outside diameter of this is approximately 1.5 inches, and the inside diameter is going to be a little less than 1 inch. And if you take a close look at the overall thickness, you'll see how it rides absolutely perfectly on this inner portion, because once again, we don't want to bang on the race, the cage, because it's kind of thin metal and it would be damaged. So we want to make sure, see that, how it fits real nice there, and it's not touching this portion. I went ahead and slid the greased bearing over. This fits the bearing very nicely, but it also fits the stem loosely, so that when we come down to the bearing, and now we're going to go ahead and drive it, the bottom bearing, all the way to the 2 washers we put on there. That was a real hard job. That's a good thing. When it comes time to change bearing service, whatever you may need to do, it's probably going to come off of there a lot easier than a modern Springer. So now we're ready to go ahead and introduce the Springer to the frame. Woo! All right, we are going to employ my assistant coworker, the doctor. He is going to put that 4x4 underneath these rockers once I slip it up into the frame. Then I'm going to go ahead and pop the bearing, top bearing on, and the crown nut, and then it'll just stay there all by itself. All right, let's get her on there. So we're just going to slide it up on to the frame. Okay, doctor, get my 4x4 in there. Put your hand underneath it right there. And then we can go ahead and put the top bearing on. And it needs to seat like so. And then we're going to put our crown nut on. This is your crown nut. This is what sets the adjustment on the bearings. And this would be also a good time to show you a nifty tool we have here. Now, you don't have to run right out and buy one of these tools. You can struggle like I am with my tired hands, or you can get one of these nifty tools from the Cyclery, which we have on the website, and it does the work for you. And notice how it's knurled for easy gripping, and it also has a 1/2-inch drive on the top, so if you decide to put a socket on there. Okay, once you get to the bottom, you're going to want to grab this and pull up on it, and see how I got a bunch more turns. Now it's obviously touching the top of the bearing. This is a good time to use the tool to tighten it down even further. We're going to talk about bearing adjustment next. We're just going to preliminary set the bearing adjustment because it's probably best to have the wheel on. And since this is all for mock-up, I know you're going to want to know how to adjust your bearing, so I'm going to try to explain it to you. One of the things that's very important on any front end, it doesn't matter what kind of front end it is. Let's go ahead and take this 4x4 out of there. We have this jack supporting it, should be pretty good. We'll just jack it up a little, and look at that. 4x4 comes right out. Look at that. Right now, I can tell that that's too loose. That's too loose for a Springer front end. But one of the things you want to do as you're doing your bearing adjustment is with your wheel on is you want to grab it down here and you want to pull fore and aft. And if you feel any play whatsoever, you're way too loose. But right now, I can tell from experience that that's a little bit too loose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab the fancy tool we have. Okay, I went ahead and grabbed a ratchet and attached it to this nifty tool. Once again, if you don't have the tool, you can use a punch, like a brass punch or something soft so that you don't damage these cogs or whatever you want to call them on this crown nut. But this really is a handy tool. And basically, I'm tight fore and aft, but that's a little bit too loose for my liking. See how easily it moves back and forth? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten it even more than it was. Okay, oh, would you look at that? See how the fork is staying in the center and it's not falling immediately? Like a minute ago, it was very loose. It would just fall immediately to the frame. This is a good preliminary adjustment till you get the bike on the road and you can road test it. And if you feel like you need a little tighter, you don't want to over tighten it. That's not good for the bearings, and you don't want it to be too loose where it's just falling immediately. And now I'm going to give you just a little bit of information. See, even now that it's almost like it's taken a little set now that it's happy, but see that right there? They call that fall away on a modern Springer, like a Softail Springer. And one of the things that you'll notice about a Softail, like an FL Softail Springer, is it will have a hole on the back end of the fender in the middle. And you're like, gee, what the heck's that hole for? Well, it's to do a fall away adjustment. And this is going to sound really crude, but this is the way Harley-Davidson wants you to do it. So what you would do is you would put a piece of tape on the floor right here. and then you would center the front fork and you would tie a plumb bob to the hole on the fender. And you'd hang it down and get it to stop moving, and then you would mark the tape, and that would be your center starting point. And then what you would do with the wheel, the fender, the brake, everything all attached to the front end, you'd basically just kind of tap, tap, tap on the fender until the front fork falls, like so. And then you would look at the plumb bob at the point where it started when it fell, when you were tapping it. And then there's a measurement in the book, and that's your proper bearing adjustment on a Softail Springer, which should, in theory, apply to a Springer like this. But since we don't have a wheel and we don't have anything else connected, this is my preliminary adjustment for if I was on final assembly before I'm going to road test it. And I can even tell now, it almost seems just a little bit too loose, so we can go ahead and tighten it a little bit more. And I'm just barely tightening it. And see how it stays in the center now? But it also still turns freely. It's nice and free. It's not binding up. And it's very important that you don't have any play in the bearings, because that will cause a problem going down the road. And then the next thing I want to show you is a couple of things here. I very frequently get a phone call from a customer and he says, hey, I'm going to buy a Springer and I'm going to put it on my blah, blah, blah. Do I need to buy the fork cups with the hidden fork stop in them? And I'm like, probably not. And the reason why is because you'll see there's a bump on the rear leg of the fork on each side. And for this application, as well as a big twin and a lot of other applications, you won't need any fork stop, because when that bump hits the frame tube here, that's where the fork stops. It's not going to keep going. Another thing you'll know I want to point out is this dust shield on this stock Harley part does not come down far enough to meet the top of a Triumph frame. And so what I did the last time I put a Springer like this on this frame is I had my buddy Tim over at Ferrucci Fabrications weld a piece to the bottom of this dust shield just to make it a little bit taller, so it would go to the top of the frame where there's like a little step, a little lip here, and that kind of made it aesthetically more pleasing, and would also keep water or whatever you have out of there. And you may have also noticed I did not put a dust shield on the bottom. I don't normally run dust shields on the bottom with Springers. Okay, now we're going to install the Lowbrow Custom Springer Riser Adapter Top Clamp. This allows us, once again, to put our risers on these two holes. Now, one of the things we're going to have to do is we are going to put the risers on first, because of the fact that these two beveled holes where the fasteners go will be like that, and you wouldn't be able to get those in when you have this bolt, the pinch bolts in. These do come with 2 sets of bolts depending on what riser you're using. I did have to cut just a skosh off the threads on these because it was sticking up where it would have hit the bar. So we'll go ahead and get those installed on here. And now, technically speaking, we should probably even put the handlebars on as well, because they will go on, and then we can final tighten this, and then we could just leave this sub-assembly or whatever you want to, the adapter clamp together until the end of the journey. So we'll grab the bars I've chosen for the project. I chose to use a Cycle Standard Scrambler, 1-inch non-dimpled. I think this is gonna put me in a good place. We'll find out. So let's go ahead and get those on the risers so we can go ahead and tighten down the riser bolts from the bottom to keep moving forward on our Springer installation. I went ahead and put the risers on the top clamp, put the handlebars on the risers, tightened everything down, these 2 bolts here and these 4 here. And now, before we put the top clamp on, I want to show you this neat part that we have from Colony. It is top plugs for classic Springer. They fit this front end. They're going to go in these holes right here. Because of the fact that we're not using the holes for a riser or anything else, we want to plug them off. So we'll go ahead, we got one on there. They come with an O-ring on the top that pretty much keeps it from loosening. And incidentally, threads on this are metric, so you're not going to be using those riser adapters, studs. Not really a fan of those anyway. Ooh, that's a tight one there. There she goes. Use the O-rings that come with them. And they just simply thread in these holes, like so. That'll give it a nice, clean, finished look. And I'm fairly certain that the top clamp is going to slide over those. And see how that gives it a nice finished off look. So before I put this on, I'm going to go ahead and add the two socket head bolts, the pinch bolts on here. Easier than trying to futz around with it on there. Sometimes it's easier to do stuff like this without your ratchet on there. See, look, my thing's got knurling on it, just like a handlebar. Wow. Okay, we've got those on. We can go ahead and put this on next. And it's always a good idea to put the dome nut on the top before you tighten the pinch bolts, because it may just pull it down a little bit. And so we'll go ahead and put that on. Oh, look at that. Did you see how that sucker just dropped on there, just like perfect? And see how it's got a little rocking motion right now? So if we were to tighten the pinch bolts first and then this, it might kind of distort it. And we don't want to do that. All right, gang, I'm a human. I screwed up the progression of the way I put things together. Guess what? Can't get my giant socket on the nut now. It just needs that much more room. So since this is just mock-up and this is not final assembly, I'm not going to go backwards and but with the handlebars off, risers on, it would be possible to use this big socket to tighten the nut. I also got my giant wrench out of the toolbox that fits the nut, and it just doesn't fit down in there. You can't swing it and get on it. Don't screw up like me, and when your final assembly comes along, put the bars on after. But in reality, I didn't screw up that badly, because now the bottom part of the riser is completely tight. So it's not like I have to go way backwards. All I have to do is take these two caps off, bars off, tighten nut, bars back on, two caps back on. Not a big deal. So we'll go ahead and keep rolling forward. And you can see how nice those little caps I just put in there kind of finish it off. Look how it ended up just right. I'm super happy about the way that ended up. But we haven't tightened the pinch bolts, so we will snug those up because we will be rolling the bike around before it gets disassembled. And so we'll just give these a snug up. All right, I just want to reiterate that we are using a true Star Hub roller bearing wheel, stepped axle. You're not doing a 3/4 inch wheel on this. Look at that. Does that look like 3/4? Nope. Look at that. Does that look like 3/4? Nope. Okay, we have emptied the contents of this awesome crate that this brake kit came in from Cannonball W&W Cycles in Germany. And I've spread out the parts that were in the box just to familiarize myself with what we're doing here. Let's see, it also came with this envelope. Let's see what's in here. Maybe it's some instructions. Yeah, top secret. A decal. That's nice. Okay, what do we got here? Instructions? A diagram with some descriptions of which parts are which for the kit. Now, the one thing that's not included with the kit are these colony bolts. On a normal Star Hub wheel, these would hold your brake drum to the wheel. Now, they have a taper on them, as well as the hub has the same taper. On the kit, it's going to hold this adapter to the Star Hub wheel, and this will go onto the hub, and then the bolts will go into these larger holes, and then the brake rotor will attach to the outside, and this is to move the brake rotor over to meet the brake caliper. And they've marked the bags with numbers that correspond to the diagram. I went ahead and put the wheel in the wheel chuck on the lift. That's generally the easiest way to attach things to a wheel, is to have some way to hold it rather than struggling with it on the workbench. So let's go ahead and move on over to the lift, and we'll get these parts installed on the wheel, and then we'll keep moving along here and get this awesome brake kit installed. All right, well, we didn't get any torque specs with the kit. So what I'm going to use is general torque specs for fastener size. So these are 3/8 by 16, and a normal 3/8 16 torque spec for grade 5 or grade 8 is going to be about 23. So I'm going to round it up to 25. I think that'll be fine. And then I looked up a brake rotor for Harley, and it said 16 to 24 on a front, 30 to 35 on a rear. So I'm going to just go ahead and torque all of these fasteners to 25, and we'll see how it goes. I think it should be okay. Obviously, use caution when you don't know torque spec, as far as it's a kind of a feel thing. If it feels like something's going to go wrong, probably is. This adapter is simply going to slide over that, and then I'm going to go around to the other side. We'll go ahead and get some Loctite. I'm going to go ahead and use red Loctite because we don't want the adapter to come loose. And once again, anytime you're using Loctite, a little bit is fine. I'm putting one pretty good drop on there. You don't need to slather it with Loctite. And I have this special socket that will go through the hub to the other side. And it's just a 7/16 and an Allen wrench I cut off for doing this exact job. So we'll use this. We'll get these started by hand, and then we'll put the torque wrench on them and see how it goes. You have to line up the holes, and you'll see there's a beveled hole and there's a plain hole. So I've lined those up to the beveled holes because of the fact that the fastener has a bevel on it. So what you're going to do is you're going to set this in between here and get it where it needs to go, and then use the corresponding hole. Once again, making sure you're in the beveled holes, because their other holes would line up, but they don't have a bevel for the fastener. And you can see the bevel on that one right there, and you can plainly see that the one next to it is not beveled. So don't put it in the hole that's not beveled. Kind of a fiddly little job. Okay, let's go ahead and torque them. And let's go in a cross pattern. So we went there, there, here. I feel real good about that. Okay, now the adapter is torqued to the wheel. We'll go ahead and get the brake rotor on. All right, once again, Loctite. And nice locator on there. Piece of cake. We got 3/16 for these. And as usual, I like my nice long extension. Okay, we'll go ahead and torque these. Once again in a star pattern. And there you have it. Adapter, rotor installed. This is a 10-inch rotor. I think that's going to look good. 11-inch, 11.5 would be standard size on a modern bike, but 10 would be on like a vintage shovel head that had a disc brake. Right now that we have our brake disc and spacer installed, I went ahead and slid the jack and the bike and the whole thing forward, because this is probably the best way to get things lined up, where I have the jack where I'm able to move the bike up and down to get the axle lined up. And you know, it's just easier. This is being held by the wheel chock. If you don't have a table lift, it's going to probably be a little more challenging, but it can be done without a table lift. If you still use a jack, and you're probably going to need a helper. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the caliper bracket on. And this is kind of a little jigsaw puzzle, but it's not really that bad. This is your actual caliper bracket, and you'll notice it has a bushing in the middle of it. And the reason for that bushing is because any Springer brake caliper bracket needs to move when the rockers move. So when you hit a bump, the brake also moves. If it was rigidly mounted, the first time you hit the brakes, it would try to bend the forks. So that's why it has that bushing and a grease fitting. So that'll be nice once everything's all assembled and final assembly, the bike's all done, we'll grease that. We also have some Zert fittings here on the rockers, which will get greased with a grease gun. And now we have this little part here that's called an axle sleeve. And one side of this will fit in the bushing, and then this diameter of this will fit through the hole on the rocker. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I'll tell you now, there's two different size holes on the rockers. They're not the same size hole. And the other rocker on the other side of the bike is offset, and that's because of the way the drum brake was set up. This machine surface here, well, let's move this out of the way just for a second. This will fit in here, like so. And then the caliper bracket, I'm gonna go ahead and put these two together here. It might be a little easier because this is probably a very tight tolerance, because it has to be precise. That goes like that. And then this will go into that machined there. We also have a brake stay that's gonna go here. We have this washer that will go on next. Well, you can't put this on backwards because there's a step inside there. And so it will only go this way, and that allows this to move once the axle's tightened. I'm gonna go ahead and get this stuff on there, and then we'll put the next piece on. But you'll see how that's gonna work. And so you've got, once again, just to review, you've got axle sleeve, brake caliper bracket, spacer, this facing this direction. You see that edge coincides with this machined edge, once again, to allow this to be able to pivot. So let's go ahead and keep moving forward here. This is probably gonna wanna drop down. And then hopefully if we're lined up, I kinda lined things up before we started, and that will go, oh, look at that. And then you have this nut that will go on this large thread. And I'm just gonna snug these things up for the video because this is all gonna come apart again at a later date. Obviously, if you're installing this on your bike, you wanna tighten everything down as you go along. So I'm just gonna snug these things up and see how that can still move. Applies to any Springer, not just this one. Any Springer bracket has to pivot. Once again, snugging that up. Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and put this link that will attach the caliper bracket to the fork. And you see that it has heim joints in it because this also needs to move. So this bolt here will go into the caliper bracket. See how it has a shoulder? Well, then when you put the shoulder into the heim joint, that allows this to move. We've got this bolt here also with a shoulder, and then it has a lock tab. And so the bolt goes through the lock tab, then that will go onto this boss on the Springer, and then this one will attach here. It's also gonna have a nylock, which I'm not gonna tighten down, I'll just loosely install it on final assembly. That will get tightened. I don't wanna use the nylock until we're ready. And then you're gonna rotate this up, and then there's going to be a threaded hole on this, and when this gets final assembly, that will get some Loctite. And now it's starting to look like a brake. And so the next thing we could do is we could go ahead and put the axle in, because we do want to have the other spacer on the other side with the axle, and then there's a castle nut that goes on the outside and a cotter pin for when everything's all tightened. And then the last thing we're going to do, well, not the very last thing, but then the next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and put the caliper on, and we'll talk about why we have all this extra stuff here. And that's our Banjo bolt and our caliper mounting bolts. So let's go ahead and head over to the other side of the bike. We'll get the axle installed. You will also need this axle spacer. It doesn't come with a kit, and probably the reason they don't include some of these things with the kit is they're assuming that you have a Springer and you have a drum brake, and you're basically converting from a drum to a disc. That's why some of these parts just aren't included with the kit. This spacer will get installed right there in between the rocker and this machine surface here, like so. And then you have your stepped axle. And if everything's lined up, it should slide through there pretty easily. If it's not, jiggle it around, wiggle it, and there she is. There's also, I didn't show you, but we'll pull this back out just a skosh. There's also this little step on that, ever so slightly, that goes to the rocker. And that's that. And you also notice more Zert fittings on the rockers, and there's also a Zert fitting on the star hub. We've got our axle in. We're gonna go ahead and add a washer and the castle nut, because once again, there's gonna get a cotter pin when it's done. And once again, I'm just gonna snug this stuff up for the video so I can show you how we're going to check the alignment of the caliper to the rotor. That should be good for video purposes. And let's see, that one's good. That one's where it needs to be. Anytime you're installing any brake, doesn't matter if it's this one, a rear, anything at all, there's generally a split on the caliper in the middle. Well, that split is a good reference point, because what you want when this is done is you want that split in the middle of the caliper to line up with the center of the rotor. And if it's all the way this way, or if it's all the way this way, it's going to cause one of the two brake pads to rub more than it should, and then that'll cause premature wear. So they provide with the brake kit a whole bunch of shims, and they're different thicknesses. Now, if we reference the diagram, you can see that both locations where the bolts go, top and bottom, for the brake caliper, it says 5 and 6. 5 says it's a brake caliper spacer. It's 3 millimeters thick, and then in the notes it says if required. It's a way to make sure that this lines up on every application. The number 6 is a 2 millimeter spacer, and it also says if required. 16 and 19 are shims, and they're various thicknesses. One is 1.0 millimeter, one is 0.2 millimeter, 0.3, 0.5, 0.1. So they give you a multitude of shims so that you can make sure that the center line on this is dead nut center line with this. We'll go ahead and we'll slide the caliper on and just see where we're at with no shims to start. When you put the caliper on, we're gonna trial fit it one time and see where we're at to start, okay? It's pretty obvious that it's gonna need some shims, because if I were to force it all the way over that way, it's way out of alignment. So center edge of rotor, center split of caliper. So I can see there's a pretty big gap there and there. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna just randomly try, let's try the thickest spacer first, and it almost seems like that's not gonna be enough either, but we'll just try it just to see what it looks like. And let's go ahead and get both in there so it's even. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and snug up these bolts, and then I'm going to take a look. And the caliper is still this way a little bit, so we need to add some more in there. And now it looks like we're going to need some thinner shims. The first time I put the caliper on, I used both of the thick shims they provided. One was 3 millimeter and one was 2 millimeter, and it was too far this way. So then I determined that I needed to use some of the variable thickness shims. And so what I did to make my life a little easier was they gave you 16 through 19 on the diagram. They had 0.2, 0.3, 0.5, and 0.1. So I basically took all the shims and I measured them and I put them in a pile, and then I randomly tried until I got everything centered, and I ended up using both of the 2s, both of the 3s, and both of the 5s, as well as the thicker of the 2, the 3 millimeter. So that combination of shims behind this bracket and this caliper got me lined up. Center line caliper, centerline rotor. So I'm pretty happy with the result on that, and that's basically the way it's done to get it lined up. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and install our master cylinder on the handlebar, and then we're gonna figure out what size brake line we're gonna need. We'll be getting close to the end of the program here. So now that we have the caliper shimmed to the proper distance so that it lines up perfectly with the rotor, we're good with that part of the job. And so while I was looking at the diagram for the shim part numbers and thicknesses, I realized that there were some washers that I was supposed to put under this strap here. And the next thing I did, I started looking through all the packages that came with the kit. And would you look how they like numbered everything corresponding to the frickin', I mean, look at this. They did a real nice job and had all these packages, you know, and with numbers. And I seem to not have a package with numbers on it for the washers for this. And so I was like, oh wow, this really sucks. Started to freak out. I get this from customers sometimes. I start looking everywhere. I look everywhere. Where do I find the package? In the bottom of this box, under the flap. And I'm like, yay, there it is, 10, 14, and 15. That's the washers I'm missing. So it just goes to show, if we send you a box of parts, look everywhere for that missing thing before you give me a shout. Because 9 times out of 10, it's gonna be just hidden somewhere, you know. According to the diagram, 2 number 10 washers, that's these 2. One is going to go in between the rear bolt, and one is going to go under the head of the front bolt. So we'll go ahead and put those on there. Actually, we're going to put this one on, and then we'll go to the other one, because there's one other washer we're going to put on there. Now, if you're going to take this bolt out, you have to support this, or it'll just go flopping down to the bottom, which wouldn't be the end of the world. It wouldn't like cause a problem. Actually, we're going to let it flop to the bottom. And then you're going to put that washer under the head of this. Very nice machine, very nice tight fit. Everything's beautiful there. This threads into this with our heim joint here. So we'll go ahead and get that started with the washer that I forgot to put on there, silly me. Okay, so we have a washer under the head of the front one, and that's a number 10 according to the diagram. And we'll grab a socket and tighten that up here in a second. And then on the rear, we have a number 10 that's going to go on the back side under the head of the nut. But before, and I didn't want to mix up this one because on the diagram, the other washer it shows is a number 14. And according to the diagram, it says washer, and it has a dimension for it, and it says with tag. Well, this had a piece of safety wire, so this is the one. So we know this is the proper washer that's going to go. You're going to slide this stay back off, and then you're going to put the washer onto the bolt, the shoulder bolt, and then carefully lift this back up to the heim joint, and then making sure that your lock washer, your lock tab, not a lock washer, is aligned the correct way. Okay, there it is. So that this tab these will get bent over when this is tightened. So this part of the tab faces this way, and this part of the tab faces rear, so that one of these will get bent over. And that's so that there's not a chance of this coming off of the leg when you're riding down the road. And then there's going to be another one of the number 10 washer on the back side before you put the nut on. Now there was one other thing that was in that bag, and it was a shim, and it said if needed. So let's give it an eyeball here. And I don't really understand why we would need another shim there. That would move this out that way further. So I think it's going to be okay the way it's installed now. So I was basically just showing you the additional washers that were in the bag that was missing. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and talk about what Banjo fittings we're gonna use, and we're gonna show you how to measure for a brake line. And the cool thing about this job is the caliper already has a Banjo bolt, comes with it, as well as the sealing washers, so we'll take that off in preparation for determining which Banjo bolt we wanna use. We'll set that here. And I've installed the master cylinder on the handlebar. And I've also installed the throttle that I'm going to use. And the reason I did that is because I positioned the throttle on the bar where it's going to stay when the bike is done. And so I also wanted to position the master cylinder where it was going to be when the bike is done. And the reason for that is because if I would have clamped this someplace different and maybe it would have scratched up the bar or marked it up, this way you'll avoid that type of situation where your nice new bars have a clamp mark on it or something because you had to reposition your master cylinder because you didn't have your throttle control on there. Okay, so the master cylinder I'm using is made by Custom Tech. According to W&W Cycles, this is the one they recommend to go with this caliper. It is 12mm bore size. It's ideal for this setup. It also comes with a Banjo bolt, which is kind of nice because then I don't need to figure out what Banjo bolts I need. This one is a little different from the bottom, but I don't think that's, oh, and there goes our sealing washer. Comes with the bolt and the sealing washers. These are 10mm. We have a variety of Banjo fittings, and they're available in a straight one, and they're available in a 90, a 45, a 35, and a 20 degree. And what that means is when it comes off, it will have that type of bend on it. I'm not going to waste a bunch of time showing you every different Banjo fitting we have. I went ahead and picked some that I felt would do a good job for this particular application, and I'll show you why. I picked a 45 degree. Once again, 10mm, and we'll head on over to the master cylinder and show you why I picked this degree of angle. Now there's also some sealing washers on here, and I've always noticed how they have kind of a rounded edge and a flat edge. I always try to at least face them the same direction, so I have the flat edge facing up on here. So we'll go ahead and put the Banjo fitting into there, and then I'm going to put the flat edge of this one facing against that. And then we're going to thread it into the master cylinder. And then you're going to see why I picked this degree. I did try some other degrees, but at the end of the day, I decided that that bend was has a nice bend to it to kind of match the bend on the bar and head the brake line in the direction we needed to go down to the master cylinder. I also picked the same degree on the bottom. I tried a 90 and it was kind of facing kind of funky, and I tried actually every single one we had other than a straight, and I determined that that kind of makes it swoop up where it needs to go. Now, one other thing I'm going to do before I put my Banjo fitting on here, there's a little cap, a little rubber cap that keeps dirt and grime from the road out of your bleeder valve. I'm noticing how close the bleeder valve is going to be to the Banjo fitting. So in preparation to bleed the brakes, I'm going to go ahead and loosen that to make sure, because it's going to be hard to get to. So now that's loose. I'm just going to lightly seat it. And then I'm going to go ahead and install my Banjo bolt and my Banjo fitting. Same method I did on the top, with the flat side facing that way. And then this one's going to go this way. And then flat side again facing in. And then we'll simply thread this into here. So I'm not going to tighten either the top or the bottom at this point in time, because I want to get my line on there first, because I might want it out here, I might want it here, I might want it, you know, not quite sure where it's going to end up. So the next thing we're going to do is show you a real easy way to measure to see what size brake line we're going to need, because you don't want to buy 3 or 4 of them and then have to send 2 of them back, or 3 of them, because you didn't figure out what you needed to begin with. And a real easy way to do this is just grab a piece of stiff wire, and then we're going to route it where we'd like the brake line to run. Okay, so I just went ahead and stuck that in there, and then I'm just going to kind of drape this over here to the other side so I can go around to the other side, and hopefully that will stay in the hole for me so I can figure out the length here. I think I'm going to have it come up and go across here and up there, is what I've determined I think will be good. So I'm going to hold it up here. It's going to run up there. It's going to go across here. And then see how I'm just holding it against that. And then I'm coming up to here. And that's probably about how long it's going to need to be, so I'll just put a little bend in the wire, and then I'm going to take the wire over to the workbench and grab a tape measure, and we'll see what I measured for the line, and then we'll grab that size line and try it and see how it works. If it's not good, then we'll either go longer or shorter. Okay, so once you have your preliminary measurement with your piece of wire on the motorcycle, go ahead and pick a spot that make a reference point. I'm going to use where the workbench ends, and then I'm going to go ahead and bring it to where I bent the wire, and it's right about there. Then I'm going to go ahead and just take a Sharpie and draw a line on my workbench, and then I'm going to take my tape measure and measure, and it looks like I have 34 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and try this 34-inch line. We have these Goodrich do-it-yourself brake lines available in multiple lengths, in either black or stainless. I chose black because I want it to look unobtrusive. I don't really want a shiny brake line on a kind of an older style bike. If you prefer the stainless, we have that as well. And then this is called an AN3 type of fitting. And basically you see there's an external flare on this Banjo, and then there's an internal flare on the inside of this line, so that when these two thread together and you tighten this, you won't have brake fluid leaking everywhere. And once again, we're just going to loosely assemble this to see if I chose the correct size. And you know what's real silly? I think I'm going to utilize these fender mounts as a way to attach this to the motorcycle. And you know what? I was almost thinking about cutting those off because I'm not running a fender. Okay, so there is, oh, look at that. I think I did pretty well on the measuring. I think I'm going to figure out a way to attach this line to these two fender mounts. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the Banjo bolts, and I'm going to tighten this one so that it's facing out just a skosh, so I get kind of a loop away from the fork. And then I'm going to go ahead and tighten the one on the master cylinder so that I've got that where I like it. Oh. And now I'm going to show you guys a neat trick on how to attach something when you don't have a good way to attach something. It would be nice if I had some P-clamps. That would probably work out okay. But since I don't have any P-clamps, I'm going to show you this little trick here. You take a piece of hose and you cut a small section of it, like so. Since I'm going to be making two of these, I'm going to make the hose the same length. So we're going to cut this one a little bit shorter, just a little bit. Okay, then you take a zip tie and you run it through here like this, and then you put it around what you want to attach, and then you run the zip tie back through the hose, and then you have a way to attach it to something, like this. So then you run your zip tie through there, and now you've created a way to attach it where it's not just zip tied to the hole. But in order to make this work, we need to pull this through all the way. So what we're going to do now is we're going to shove this till this zip ties all the way that way, and then we're going to push this one all the way this way, and see how we've created a loop there. And then we can go ahead and put this in here, and then go ahead and connect it. And see, make a neat little way to connect it where you're not just slapping the zip tie through the hole and around that. Doesn't that look nice? Now we'll do one more over here and see how that kind of wants to go that way. And this is kind of keeping it off of the fork. We'll make one more of those, and now our brake line will be secure. All right, so then once you get it pulled tight, go ahead and cut your excess off. No P-clamps necessary. Okay guys, that concludes our vintage Harley Springer installation on our Triumph 70 pre-70 650 frame. Don't forget that this Springer can be used on a Harley-Davidson. I know this isn't a Harley, but you can use it on your Harley. It's really good if you've got a knuck, a pan, a shovel, you're doing a hardtail, you want to have a Springer on your bike. This is a really awesome choice. This high quality Samwel Supplies makes this Springer. We get it from W&W. This is a W&W Cannonball brake on here. Really awesome part, well made, well thought out. This should be more than enough stopping power for this little bobber bike I'm building here. And don't forget, you can also use this on your stock Harley vintage Springer. If you have a drum brake, you want to switch to a disc brake, this kit could be for you. Head on over to lowbrowcustoms.com. Check out these awesome parts and a whole bunch of other cool parts that we have for your custom bike. And get out on the road and go for a ride.